Hello and welcome to the 18th episode of Born in Quarantine. No, there is nothing wrong with your video, and as much as I would love to say that I forgot to hit record on the camera and so I only have voice, that is not the case. I have a skin problem that every now and again just bubbles up and covers my whole face, and usually I can keep it under control, but this week I couldn't. Now I contemplated the morality of showing you the horror show that is my face, but instead let us enjoy this artist rendition of what my face looks like. Usually when this happens I postpone the video, but I already postponed this episode last week, so I don't like to be known as the guy who keeps breaking his promise. So with that, it's time for us to visit the Night of the Woeful Countenance again. It's time to talk about Terry Gilliam's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote. I know the burning question that is on all your minds, and yes, the Batman mug is present throughout this recording. The reason this episode is actually postponed is the demise of Ennio Morricone. I explained it on Twitter, and it's a good plug for my Twitter too. Follow me there, and actually this episode was part of a poll that I did to choose between 4 different subjects, and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote won that poll. The death of Ennio Morricone was such a huge blow to me and to the world of, I believe, anyone who cares about movies, that I just couldn't bring myself to film because I couldn't find the peace of mind required to film the episode. And so I needed to postpone it, but then throughout the week my skin decided this is a good time to ruin this man's life. So here we are. I hope this episode is not too bad. Well, what is The Man Who Killed Don Quixote? I do believe there are a number of movies that each cinephile has that never made it to the big screen, whether it's Jodorowsky's Dune or Tim Burton's Superman Lives. They were either stuck in development hell so long that they got destroyed, or 1 or 2 cast members suddenly passed away, or the man behind the movie passed away. Terry Gilliam's The Man Who Killed Don Quixote was definitely going to be one of these movies. It has been in production for over 30 years. There is actually this kind of interesting and kind of amazing documentary called Lost in La Mancha, which I highly recommend, that documents one of the attempts that Terry Gilliam made in making this movie. And in that attempt, Johnny Depp was involved and a French actor by the name of Jean Rochefort. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Who cares? It's French. Now, the documentary was originally going to be a making of documentary, the making of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, but sadly it became a tale of how a movie can get so unlucky. So many problems that just crippled the production.
Ladies and gentlemen, just listen up for a second. I suspect there's a large bunch of lightning and a storm about to hit us.
And it wasn't the first. There were a lot of different actors and producers and studios that were attached to this project throughout the years. Reportedly Robert Duvall, the late John Hurt, or Michael Palin were all involved to play the role of Don Quixote. But in 2017, Terry Gilliam announced that the movie was going into production with Adam Driver and Jonathan Pryce, who I will discuss in length in the later chapters. Now, as usual, it just sort of brushed away because it wasn't the first time the movie has gone into production. But in 2017, Terry Gilliam announced that the filming was done and The Man Who Killed Don Quixote was entering post-production. And that is an amazing statement.
I was born by the special will of heaven to restore the lost age of chivalry. I am Don Quixote de la Mancha.
The tale of over 3 decades of trying was now having a sort of a happy ending. Now, obviously, the movie was not going to be the one that Gilliam imagined. There was going to be budgetary issues. There was going to be a different cast. The story had changed so much, but it was a triumph nonetheless. The movie got made. So, while watching this movie, how can you fairly judge it? How can you sit and watch this fruit that was 30 years into making and be impartial? Well, I'm trying to do that, but it's hard. I'm telling you, it's really hard. So first, what's the story? The story of The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and this is going to be a bit of a spoiler-full review, so go to this timeline if you don't want to hear any spoilers about the story. But the story tells the tale of an advertising director named Toby, portrayed by Adam Driver, who is in Spain filming one of his advertisements and comes across an old movie he made called The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, and realizes he's near the village that he filmed that movie and goes to visit the village. In there he finds the man who he, casted to play Don Quixote, kind of believes that he is Don Quixote. Sort of like Alonso Quijana, the man from Cervantes' Don Quixote, realizes and believes that he is Don Quixote. So Don Quixote, or the man who believes he is Don Quixote, sees Toby and believes that Toby is his Sancho. They go on an adventure, a very Terry Gilliam-esque adventure.
Blood is a cruel jailer, Sancho.
What?
Did you see the look in her eyes?
And they sort of happen to phase between reality and dream. Better said, they seem to phase between reality and Don Quixote's reality. And by the end, the man who believes to be Don Quixote is sadly dead. But the moniker of Don Quixote falls upon Toby, and Toby becomes Don Quixote.
Prepare to meet your doom!
There are a lot of subplots. As I said, Terry Gilliam is a kind of a director that doesn't really want to tell a straightforward story, so he adds a lot of subplots. But this is the meat of the story. This is the thread that connects all of these subplots together. So, with the story out of the way, how is the movie? You'd think now that I am not showing myself, I would write a script, but no, this is still unscripted. Remaining impartial while reviewing a movie and talking about a movie is kind of a hard thing. As much as I want to try, there is this thing that I love Terry Gilliam. I think he's one of the best directors of all time. He made one of my favorite movies of all time, Brazil. And he's the director that I see a lot of myself in him and sort of want to be like him when I make movies. So with that mindset, it is very much easier for me to, for the lack of a better word, rationalize all the mistakes of the movie. The movie has budgetary issues and it shows. It is much more ambitious than it is. So when there are CG moments, it's not very good. The scope wants to be bigger, but the result is not as big. There are a lot of editing mistakes, which as someone who has done editing, I can see that it happens because there is a lack of footage, not that they forgot to polish. The pacing is kind of off, and I can see that there were a lot of scenes that are cut. The pacing seems to pad the movie to an extent. And there is a story issues as well. Towards the end, the character of Don Quixote has a 180, which is not very much explained and is way out of character for him. But there are also so many good things about the movie, even in its current state. The story is choppy and the pacing is a bit off. But there are moments in the story that, just to quote a very famous philosopher,
just works.
the relationship between Don Quixote and Sancho are amazing. The relationship between Toby, oh shit, I called Toby Sancho, didn't I? Well, we'll get to that in a bit. The relationship between Toby and his love interest is an interesting one. The phasing between reality and the madness of Don Quixote is so well done that it brings memories of Gilliam's best, sort of the adventures of Baron Munchausen or the aforementioned Brazil. But to top it all is the cast. Adam Driver does a very good job being Toby, but the cake definitely goes to Jonathan Pryce. Now, Jonathan Pryce is an amazing actor in and of himself. If you haven't seen Two Popes, definitely watch it, because Jonathan Pryce does an amazing job. And he has worked with Gilliam before in Brazil, The Adventures of Baron Munchausen, and sadly Brothers Grimm, which I consider to be Terry Gilliam's worst movie. His work in Brazil is definitely just a marvel to watch. Sam Larry is one of my favorite characters of all time, and part of it is because of Jonathan Pryce's performance. And I'm not kidding when I'm saying he becomes Don Quixote.
Oh, come, sit with me, huh? We will read it together. Now, I will sound the words, and you can look at the pictures.
When I think of Don Quixote, I sort of nowadays think of Jonathan Pryce in that role. He has the madness, he has the, well, over-the-top delivery, but he also has the childlike wonder of Don Quixote. When you watch him be Don Quixote, you realize this man can be Don Quixote. This man can believe all of these stories and become Don Quixote, which is not an easy thing. So Jonathan Pryce is Don Quixote. And so the movie hinges around that, and, well, I don't want to quote the same philosopher twice, but
all of this just works.
Which is not a good review point. I am not giving you enough to go on, but it's one of those things. Terry Gilliam, unlike some of my other favorite directors, is not a director that I can explain very well. He works in the experience, and unless I do an hour and a half long episode commenting on each and every scene, I can't really convey the experience. Jonathan Pryce's Don Quixote is the pivotal point in all of the movie, and Jonathan Pryce's amazing performance is the glue that is holding all of the movie together. He is Don Quixote, no doubt about it. But what does Terry Gilliam uses Don Quixote for? I've talked in depth in my episode on Man of La Mancha about Don Quixote and my personal relationship with Don Quixote and how I see Don Quixote is used. In The Man Who Killed Don Quixote is more of an idea. He is a moniker. You become Don Quixote when you realize there is nothing to life that isn't worth losing. To say it another way, sanity is a burden, and when you realize that, and you are ready to put down the burden of sanity, you become Don Quixote. The final line of the movie, and this is not a spoiler, don't worry, because it's spoken earlier in the movie, is
I am Don Quixote de la Mancha, and I will live forever.
this is what the man who killed Don Quixote sees Don Quixote as. Now, Terry Gilliam himself doesn't really like Don Quixote. He thinks that he is a mad old man. But in my opinion, or at least how I see the movie, is that Don Quixote is a nobility. He's a noble idea. He is what we all want to think heroes are. It requires a lot of madness. It requires a lot of childlike innocence. Without them, we can't have Don Quixote. And, well, the movie itself is a presentation of why the childlike innocence and the struggles of one man doesn't always lead to victory. I'd promise on Twitter that I'd sing, and I think this is a good way to actually say why Don Quixote is Don Quixote. In The Man of La Mancha, there is this song called Knight of the Woeful Countenance. Hail, Knight of the Woeful Countenance, Knight of the Woeful Countenance. Wherever you go, people will know of the glorious deeds of the Knight of the Woeful Countenance. O valorous knight, go and fight for the right, and battle all villains that be. Oh, what when you do? What will happen to you? Thank God I won't be there to see. We all want to think Don Quixote is real, because Don Quixote needs to be real. Because if Don Quixote isn't real, we've all been lied to our whole lives. Terry Gilliam doesn't believe in Don Quixote himself. But there is always one. There is always one madman who believes he is Don Quixote and goes forward. He brings another madman. Toby at the beginning of the movie is a prick, for the lack of a better word.
No, it's not we can muck up the world, it's we can fuck up the world. That's what I wrote. That's what we're gonna shoot. Me, organ grinder, you monkey. No agua, thank you.
That was a good one.
Toby at the end of the movie is not a prick. We call that an arc in storytelling. I am sorry, I'm being so obnoxious, I know. But Toby changes, and why he changes to a seemingly random series of events is because his reality shifts with Don Quixote. For a moment, he sees the world as Don Quixote does, and he realizes how scary the world is, how horrorful and horrendous the world can be. What he does? He puts down the burden of sanity and becomes mad. Is becoming Don Quixote a cowardice? I don't know. I'm not sure. Part of me wants to say no, it's not a cowardice to always look for the goodness or go to the impossible dream. The other part of me sees the cynicism in the world and the state of the world and realizes maybe being mad, maybe being Don Quixote is just throwing away your eyes. I'm not sure. And it's one of those things that I don't want to be sure about. So yeah, that is Don Quixote, the Knight of the Woeful Countenance, the man who we all know is doomed to fail. But watching him go to the sunset, knowing that Don Quixote is out there and he will live forever, is somewhat of a reassurance. Because honestly, and I know this might be a cowardice itself, I don't want to live in a world that doesn't believe in Don Quixote. Anyways, I hope that this episode is not that bad. Again, I didn't want to postpone again to break my word again. So I thought this was the next best thing other than wearing a full mask. And again, I want to mention Ennio Morricone. The contributions that this man has done for the past couple of weeks I haven't managed to get out his music from my ears. The track Poverty from Once Upon a Time in America is going through my head over and over and over again, and I find myself just tear up thinking about him. So I hope that my skin calms down by next week. I really don't like to do this voiceover things. I think without my hand movements, which I'm doing a lot behind the microphone, which negates the purpose, is not very well done. I hope to see you face to face next week, and if this, my microphone, and that, my computer worked, I'll see you again.